Archaeology, old bones and relics in a museum, right? Oh no, the real work in archaeology takes place out here in the landscape. Like forensic scientists, archaeologists unravel the mysteries of our past. So join me as we explore the world of New Zealand's archaeology.
The first Polynesians to settle in New Zealand were greeted by powerful forces of nature. Volcanoes and earthquakes would have made life difficult at times, but could they also have encountered a more terrifying force? Tonight, geoarchaeologists are hunting for evidence of prehistoric tsunami.
We're on the wild and windswept Wairarapa coast. 600 years ago, there were Māori communities all along this coastline, but then they mysteriously disappeared. Had it become just too hard for them to live here? Or were they the victims of a natural disaster?
Look at the waves coming! Clear out, people! Clear out! I hope no one was out there! Oh my God!
2004's Boxing Day tsunami was a wake-up call that had many of us asking, could it happen here? The fading ripples of that disaster, mere centimetres high, did reach our shores. But could giant waves also have wreaked havoc on our coast? We live on the Pacific Ring of Fire, an area where volcanic eruptions and undersea earthquakes can send shockwaves of water known as tsunami rushing towards land. We know about earthquakes and volcanoes, but we haven't experienced a major tsunami in living memory. So, to find out how safe we might be in the future, geologists join forces with archaeologists to delve into our past. The search starts just north of Cook Strait at a place called Okoroponga. I'm here with archaeologist Bruce McFadgen and Niwa tsunami expert James Goff. Apparently, there are spectacular archaeological remains here. Catch is, they're only really visible in the dawn light from the top of that hill.
Oh, guys, you've dragged me up here at dawn. I have to say, incredible view though. What are we looking at down here? What are these lines?
Well, the lines you can see down there are old gardens, old Maori gardens. They were put in, I suppose about 600 years ago by some of the first Polynesians in New Zealand.
Why did they settle here? This is terribly inhospitable.
Oh, it looks inhospitable today, but then it would have been a much better place than now. There would have been forest pretty much down to the water's edge.
Māori established their gardens here in sheltered forest clearings. The bush also provided birds and other resources, while lagoons on the coast teemed with ducks and eels. So why did they leave? Most archaeologists believe that the effects of forest clearance combined with a little ice age made the area unsuitable for gardening.
This is the conventional wisdom, that the climate cooled down, and since these people were growing subtropical plants with a cooler climate, they couldn't grow them anymore, and they sort of finally gave up and just moved out.
The time when they're abandoning here, yes, there was a cooler period, but it went from a much warmer environment to the kind of temperature we're looking at today. Now, we're not in a little ice age, are we?
But if it wasn't climate change, why did they leave? To Bruce and James, this flat area hints at a more catastrophic explanation.
If you look down here, you've got the stone rows, and they look very pretty from up here, and you've got a big patch of nothing. Now, that big patch of nothing tells a huge story.
A tsunami carries with it vast amounts of sand and sediment. When the water recedes, distinctive deposits are left behind. Experts can identify such deposits hundreds, even thousands of years later.
So you remember at the top of the hill I pointed out the area where the stone rows finished.
Yep.
Well, this area that we're standing on now, where the stone rows disappear, was flattened completely by a tsunami. We're standing now on a big thick layer of sand, and this was deposited by a tsunami maybe 500 years ago.
The tsunami theory is controversial, but Bruce and James claim to have uncovered hard evidence of it in one of their study pits.
Okay, well here's the pit. So I'll just get in. We have some fairly large pebbles down the bottom.
The pebbles in the bottom of the pit have been rounded and smoothed by the action of the sea, a clear indication that they've come from the beach. By contrast, any rocks that fall down from these jagged hills are sharp and angular. Another clue that this material was deposited by the sea is that it's sorted by weight.
At the very bottom we have some fairly coarse pebbly bits, and these are all marine pebbles. They've come from the beach over there. It finds upwards. It's coming up through a bunch of sort of smaller pebbles, bits of gravel and so on, and up to this point here where you've got a marked difference in colour, and this material is a lot finer at the top. And what you have in that particular sequence, let's say it's about 45 centimetres thick, something along those lines, is a tsunami deposit.
The deposit also gets finer as you move away from the sea, because the wave carried the lighter material further inland.
Now we are 9.5 metres above sea level here approximately. We're about 250 metres inland. You're getting beach pebbles and a whole bunch of material that's been picked up and carried all the way up here and deposited in a layer 45 centimetres thick. So you've got one hell of a wave here.
James studied similar deposits in Sri Lanka after the Boxing Day tsunami. The Wairarapa deposit is thicker and higher above sea level, which leads him to a chilling conclusion.
So what you're saying is that the tsunami that would have hit here was possibly considerably larger than the Boxing Day one in Sri Lanka?
Well, yeah, I think, you're depositing something twice as thick as what we're really finding in Sri Lanka, and that was 5 to 6 metres high. So we're talking 3, 4, maybe even 5 stories high.
And the parallels with Sri Lanka don't end there. The Boxing Day tsunami easily destroyed wooden buildings. Ancient Maori villages would have suffered the same fate.
The human factor is quite staggering when you think this wave is coming inland, it's carrying a vast amount of sediment with it. It's picked up every single bit of shellfish and things you can find offshore, just offshore there, and it's throwing it inland. It's picked up all the canoes, it's smashing those to pieces. It's coming through the forest, it's doing some serious damage to that. People are just another piece of detritus it's going to pick up and start throwing around.
Many of those who were neither drowned nor swept out to sea by the Boxing Day tsunami suffered terrible injuries from being crushed against debris. Most would have died from infections or food shortages if it wasn't for medical attention and international aid. But of course, there was no relief efforts in 15th century Aotearoa.
They got a lot of people with broken limbs, they got sand that's been blasted into cuts in their bodies, and these people, in today's sort of modern society, they get people coming in within 24 hours, emergency first aid and so on, and they survive. Now put it back a few hundred years, these people are lying around here, they're going to die.
And anyone who did survive faced the wider-reaching consequences of the tsunami.
The long-term effect would have been killing off what was left of the forest from saltwater poisoning.
The theory is that without the forest for shelter, the gardens were exposed, so the survivors abandoned the coast. Was it a tsunami that turned Okoroponga into the inhospitable place it is today? And if it happened in the past, could it happen again? On a remote part of the Wairarapa coast, scientists have uncovered a sand sheet that could be evidence of a massive tsunami 500 years ago. They believe that it destroyed Maori gardens and forced the survivors to abandon the coast. The Cook Strait area is rife with offshore faults, so an undersea earthquake was the most likely trigger. Earthquakes are common here, and tsunami are not unknown. In 1960, a small one rolled into Wellington's Lyell Bay following an earthquake off the coast of Chile. It took 15 hours to reach New Zealand, and crowds actually gathered to watch the waves come ashore. But 150 years earlier, Wellington experienced a much larger, locally generated tsunami. The 1855 Wairarapa earthquake was estimated at 8.2 on the Richter scale, making it even more powerful than the Napier earthquake. But few people know that it also spawned a major tsunami.
If this was 1855, I'd be about this deep in water. There were 10-metre high waves in Cook Strait which swept right over the suburb of Rongotai and plunged into the harbour, coming ashore here in what is now downtown Wellington.
But the Cook Strait region is by no means the only part of the country threatened by tsunami. So far, some of the best evidence of a prehistoric tsunami has been found at Henderson Bay in Northland.
Just looking at this magnificent piece of coastline, it's hard to believe that a massive tsunami once devastated this beach, surging right over the top of those dunes. But that's exactly what scientists say happened here in Henderson Bay some 700 years ago.
Auckland University's Scott Nicol, along with James Goff, has been studying tsunami evidence on this beach for more than 5 years.
So where are you taking me, James?
Well, I'm taking you down to the southern end of Henderson Bay, to the highest part here. But as you're going down, you'll see the dunes on the right. They're not really dunes at all. There's a whole bunch of sort of hammered, smashed around dunes here. They're completely and utterly stuffed, basically.
A beach like this should be lined with sand dunes, but here there are only ancient Pleistocene dunes, tens of thousands of years old. All of this should be covered in wind-blown sand, but it's just not here.
Where has all the sand gone?
Well, inland, where the tsunami carried the sand further inland, it stripped it off here and put it further inland, and also when the tsunami pulled back out again, it would have sucked a lot of sand out into sea as well. We'll leap out here and have a look at the area.
The lack of sand is just the first clue to the Henderson Bay tsunami. The next piece of the puzzle lies strewn all across these ancient rocky dunes. Millions of rounded pebbles are scattered about, far beyond the high tide mark, leading the scientists to a conclusion.
Okay, so you're saying this was all put here by the tsunami?
That's our hypothesis, what we're
So how high are we?
Well, we're 32 metres above the beach face.
That's why they're more than 100 feet in the old money.
Exactly.
That's right.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Wow, so it had so much power and surge behind it, it's brought all these pebbles and rocks
That's
up
right.
here.
It was still able to carry them all up here, pick them up from off there somewhere, underwater.
Yeah.
It's carried them all the way up here and just dumps this, and then it sort of keeps on going that way, and the sand comes out further along, you know. People have known about this for years, 40, 50 years. And a lot of them have put it in the too hard basket. Well, I don't know what it is.
So what are the other explanations then?
Well, you got some great ones. I mean, I heard one not long ago, which was, okay, this is canoe ballast. The Maori paddled their walkers in, carried the walkers up to the top of the dune and tipped the ballast out, and this is canoe ballast.
Why would they do that?
Well, I don't know. It's a very good question. I'm not entirely sure. But, I mean, there are lots of other explanations for this sort of thing.
Like?
Another one is sea lions. They're known to carry gravel in their gullets to aid with digestion, and from time to time they would regurgitate that.
So this would be one of the world's largest sea lion colonies up on top of it.
So when you see the scale of this,
the tsunami does start to sound far more credible, doesn't it?
You have to keep coming back and say, they're marine pebbles. How did these things get to be 32 metres above sea level?
And we find these marine pebbles out offshore. We've been out taking samples from in the nearshore zone, and you lower your dredge over and you pull up this sort of stuff. same
This is
size.
exactly what the tsunami's done. It's dredged it all up and thrown it way up the top
Yeah.
here. But there are sharp, angular stones here too, a clue that Maori may have been living in the area at the time of the tsunami. Because far from being smoothed by water, these stones have been cracked and split by fire.
These are oven stones, basically.
Oh, okay, but Maori wouldn't have been cooking up here, would they?
Oh, well, they might possibly have been, but most of the time they'd have been in some shelter, probably sort of just down the hill a little bit out of the wind. And so the majority of these probably have been lifted up by the wave and carried across the top here.
The tsunami hypothesis is compelling, but not conclusive. Can a swamp 600 metres inland hold the critical evidence? Behind the dunes, 600 metres from the sea, lies a swamp that Scott wants to investigate. A vibracorer uses vibrations to work an aluminium pipe into the ground. When they retrieve the pipe, it contains a perfect record of the life of the swamp. If a tsunami penetrated this wetland, the core should contain a telltale sand deposit. Scott and his student Max open the core to reveal a record of the last 24,000 years in the life of the wetland. The top metre and a half of the core contains nothing but wind-blown sand. But there are also two well-defined layers of peat, the partially preserved remains of plants that once grew in the swamp.
Here we have black to very dark brown organic rich peat. And we know from previous work that that is Pleistocene. That's really old, like about 24,000 years in age. Up here, from radiocarbon dating, we're dealing with an age of 700 years.
And neatly separating the layers of peat lies the jackpot, the deposit that Scott was hoping to see.
So to cut to the interesting bit, this is what we are regarding as our other evidence for the tsunami wave. This is a mix of sand, there's pumice just sitting on the top of that sand, so that probably floated in. Tsunami flow is really quite complex, turbulent, water flowing around, ripping things up, combining it in, so that's what we're looking at here. Little chunks of old swamp which have been picked up and incorporated into the deposit.
So what you're saying is that these are layers of vegetation, these straight lines that you see.
Yes.
But wouldn't they be years, if not decades or centuries apart?
What we're thinking here is this can happen in a matter of minutes. With the tsunami surge coming in and laying down these sediments really quickly, and the slight waning in flow or the weakening in flow allows the vegetation just to settle out, and another wave may come in.
I think it's important to point out, it's 24,000 just beneath the tsunami deposit there. That doesn't mean it happened around about 24,000 years ago. What that means is it's basically just planed off the whole area, just sort of completely, utterly ripped it all up. So you've lost a big chunk of time, so to speak, in this core.
Incredibly, 30 centimetres of sand has replaced a record of more than 23,000 years.
We saw in the Maldives, and you saw in Sri Lanka
as well, yeah.
This is the product of tsunami. This is the way they behave.
Yeah.
Scott and his students have got what they came for, but only detailed analysis back at Auckland University will finally confirm their theory. Max samples sand from various parts of the deposit for microscopic analysis. The swamp at Henderson Bay has always been a freshwater wetland, but if this sand was washed in by the sea, it should contain the remains of tiny sea creatures.
There, Max, what we've got here is a good example of a marine diatom which has come in from the ocean, and the only way it could have got here, of course, is with the tsunami, because we're too far inland. So this is good. Let's keep looking and see what else. So I've got 3 or 4 species here, Max, which are all from the ocean. So this is really the clincher. We've got the sand, we've got the pumice, we've got bits of broken plants, and now we've got these marine diatoms, these marine organisms, which have come in with the tsunami into the wetland and sat there waiting for us.
Current thinking is that the Henderson Bay tsunami was triggered by a submarine volcano on the Kermadec Rise. The Healy volcano last erupted 700 years ago, and pumice from it is often found on Northland beaches. But it was the collapse of the cone sometime after the eruption that most likely sent a wall of water rushing towards Northland. Normal waves disturb only the top few metres of the sea, but a tsunami extends from the sea surface to the ocean floor. So 900 metres off the coast of Henderson Bay, it picks up pebbles from the seabed. In the shallow water close to shore, it slows down and wells up, overrunning dunes some 32 metres high at the southern end of the beach. At the top of the dunes, it runs out of energy and the pebbles settle where they still lie today. Meanwhile, further up the beach, the water rushes up a stream into the wetland, carrying with it the vast amount of sand that was revealed in the core. And when the sea finally retreats, it drags the remaining sand with it, leaving behind a bare, rocky coastline.
So we've seen evidence now of 2 prehistoric tsunamis, one in Wairarapa and right here at Henderson Bay. Were these unique events?
Undoubtedly not. We've found evidence for tsunami all around the country. I mean, the west coast, the east coast of the South Island, and the west and the east coast of the North Island. Definitely not unique at all.
Could they be as big as the ones we've seen here, or is the threat that we will see smaller tsunami? What sort of scale?
Well, that's what we would call a magnitude and frequency issue. You know, the larger magnitude events don't happen that often, but they still happen.
And they still could happen.
They still will happen.